Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures. Today is Thursday, September 16th, 2021. Welcome. This is a continuation of our discussion about the capital needs. And if you recall from last week, we talked about inviting some other agencies that, if not directly impacted by city capital, but would be indirectly impacted by city capital, and to identify particular if there are synergies with what we are doing regarding capital investment in the city's infrastructure. And so this evening we have a number of presenters. We have a Toby Roach from Bi-State. We have Susan Trotman from Great Rivers Greenway. We have Neil Richardson from Sldc. And we have Kurt Stubbe from the Water Division. And so the way I'd like to proceed is that we'd like to hear from each presenter individually. We'll go to questions through the chat, but because we're restricted on time, I do want to be cognizant of the fact that we don't, if there's some questions we can't get to because we need to move to the next presenter, we will get back to anything that's not any questions that's not answered, and we'll get those out in written form after the meeting following tonight's meeting. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Toby Roach from the Bi-State, and he is here to present on some of the things that Bi-State is doing from a capital standpoint. So I'll give you the floor.
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity. And of course, good afternoon or / good evening to everyone. Obviously, my name is Toby Roach, and I'm the president and CEO of Bi-State Development. But really what our main function is, of course, Metro Transit. And that's the majority of my discussion today. However, we do run, of course, the Arch Enterprise in conjunction with the National Park Service. And of course, also coordinate freight movements all around in the St. Louis Freightway. But really the majority of our conversation tonight is centered around transit. And of course, I love to talk about transit. So I'm gonna share my screen if that's okay. There we go. Share. And I'm gonna move to this. Very good. Okay. Of course, that's right. Toby Roach. I'm the president and chief executive officer of Bi-State Development. And our fundamental business entity, really essentially 90% to 95% of our business has to do with Metro Transit. And of course, that is in 3 different venues in the St. Louis area. And that is, of course, Metro Bus with nearly 65 fixed routes, Metro Link with 38 Metro Link stations, 87 light rail vehicles, and of course, Metro Coloride, which is our traditional ADA or paratransit service. And of course, we're trying to move into the modern era just like everybody else. We're trying to innovate transit, and you may have seen, and we had the pleasure of having Mayor Jones with us for the ribbon cutting. And we're moving a lot of our rolling stock towards electrification. And what you're seeing here is on the number 70 Grand, our #1 bus line by far, all in the city of St. Louis, will be electrified. And as a matter of fact, is seeing some of these electrified units out on the alignment right now. And so one of the things and one of the really areas of concentration economically from us from a transit standpoint is to concentrate some of our resources into these new vehicles, into electrification. And we're doing that, of course, as you can see on the Grand Line. We have 14 of these vehicles that are in service right now. They are manufactured out of New Flyer in Alabama, of all places, and they are working wonderfully. This also includes a buy program that we have with our partners at Ameren with buying on a green energy basis, so that we are true to the ethic of moving to a more sustainable energy uses in transit. But of course, this has been one heck of a year. I think all of you would agree. And literally, the world has changed underneath our feet. And this is how it's changed for transit. Here you're looking at really where our current effects are as far as transit ridership. And really what we're seeing right now is a nearly 50% drop in ridership on transit. Well, believe it or not, that's actually not that bad compared to other parts of the country. And it also shows a little bit of the silver lining that we've seen in transit in St. Louis. And that is, remember that 50% is still with us. Those are the essential workers, the folks who still need to get out, who are stocking the shelves, who are doing that fundamental work at the hospitals. And we kept moving those folks all through the pandemic. I like to say that our heroes are still existent in transit. And those are the folks who showed up this morning at 3 o'clock in the morning to run that bus in the number 70 Grand and all those other lines that traverse our great city. And we've had some other wins. As you know, since I've been the president and CEO, safety and security has been our concentration, as it is, I think, for instance, in the city right now. And I love this picture. This is my favorite picture. Now, why is that? Because look at those uniforms in that picture. I have the city of St. Louis, St. Clair County, the county of St. Louis, and of course, that's Kevin Scott, the handsome gentleman there. He is my chief of security. And on behind him, of course, is our transit security specialist. One of the things that the public demanded of us that we start investing in as far as operationally is that we're sure we have a rigorous and new security program. Right now, I have all 3 of these police departments under contract in a comprehensive everyday program in safety and security that is layered and is something that we're working on rigorously. We have great partnerships. And I think this is a new era in our metropolitan area where we're showing that, look, in the public sphere, we can get along and work together. And we're showing that. We're trying to concentrate on what our frontline experience is. What are our customers seeing? We're making investments in Wi-Fi and what is the front-facing piece to the public. But the question is, what are our next movements with what's showing up as far as stimulus funding and where are we concentrating our service? So as you all may know, we received federal stimulus funding and we received $363 million in federal stimulus funding. And what we've done and what our obligations, first, there was 2 things to work on. A, no layoffs. We have accomplished that. Number 2, do not reduce service. So that service was there for the community once we were able to recover from COVID. So what we've done is we have scheduled that $363 million over the long term. And we have, of course, passed supplemental budgets with the city, with the county, and with St. Clair County, applying a discount associated with the loss in passenger revenue and the loss in tax revenue, so that there were no negative impacts to the general budgetary obligation of our funding partners. So this is how this works out. So as you can see, I have the 2020 actual expenditure, I have the FY21 actual expenditure, and then what we're doing is we're pushing that federal stimulus out over time. Now the question is, why would you do that? Well, you do that so that that 50% of ridership that I need to recover, I need to do that over that period of time. So it's fundamental financial integrity so that the system is there when we start to recover, when we recover and we experience what our ridership is. But of course, our ridership is bound to change. It's bound to change in the movements and patterns of our city. And when we're planning what a new city dynamic is in transit, we need to be thinking of what are those aspects and what are the corners of the city that we are not accessing. And of course, we need to do that with the equity lens. One of the things that, for instance, the mayor has talked about, along with Sam Page today in the CMT annual meeting, was a concentration on expansion of the system in a north side, south side alignment. Now, what my job is to do is to figure out how to be sure to get those dollars for such an alignment. And one thing that I would point to is you can see the presidential executive order, the Justice 40 initiative. Why am I pointing to this? I'm pointing to this because in the corridors that we are contemplating building, especially in North City and North County, this would apply. We would be able to essentially move up in the list in transit, should we expand the system in that way, and be able to garner more federal dollars so we can build into those corners of the city and county. This is absolutely key. If we're going to rebuild both North City, North County, and of course the South Side as well. So let me just demonstrate what the difference is. If you see on the left, the current new starts formula is essentially a 50-50 match as far as the expansion of transit projects. And you say, oh, I've just shown a projected cost of any transit project. This is just an example. That would cost $200 million. Well, yeah, we could come up with 100 million of local share, and under the 50-50 match scenario, we would have a $200 million project to build. But in moving forward in a more aggressive capital plan, and this will be available to us, assuming the stimulus plan goes through, we would move under the presidential order into the Justice 40 plan. And then we would move to the 80-20 split, which is the more traditional split that, as a matter of fact, Metrolink, the original line, was built on. As you can see, it's a discernible difference. And we need that discernible difference in order to build in these parts of the community that have suffered from decades of disinvestment. And by changing that formula, you move to a $400 million project with only a local share of 80 million. This is a sea change as far as what we see as community impact. And what I would say is that this is what we should be concentrating on. We should be adjusting what our policies are and essentially what we are sharing, okay, with our federal partners so that we can leverage as much local dollars as possible to move forward. I want to make my presentation brief so that I'm open for these kind of discussions. I want to say that I think we're at a very unique time to try to leverage the existing dollars that we have to move into the future. And I think that we have the unique situation of a congressional delegation based, albeit remember, both in Missouri and Illinois. So remember, tremendous, especially senatorial assets, both in Missouri and Illinois, and the congressional assets, which we could mobilize towards these kind of plans. So I just want to point to that possibility. My job, of course, is to be creative and think of what are the opportunities that are in front of us. And I want to leave time in case there's any specific questions. And I want to be respectful, of course, of my fellow presenters so that I don't take up too much time. So Paul, with that, I'm going to pause and see if that's adequate and go from there, because unfortunately, I'm happy to talk about transit. Nobody wants to talk about it for 2 hours.
No, thank you. Thank you, Toby. Thank you for presenting. Very interesting. Let's get directly to any of the chat questions that we've got. And the first one off the bat was, can we get any insight into the status of STL's first BRT line? That would be Bus Rapid Transit line. And if this is getting closer to the preferred option for the North-South Metro line.
So, I mean, right now, that comes to a policy decision based on, of course, what we're able to come up with local match. The real benefit of BRT is that, of course, it's lower cost, okay? But let's think about this very clearly. We have an opportunity to ask for more federal dollars at this very unique time. And let's be also very clear. We can build a transit line into North City, North County, and even the near South Side. But the key to ridership is rooftops. Whether there's jobs underneath those rooftops or folks living under those rooftops. And it's going to be absolutely key to drive ridership so that there is a unified policy that isn't just building transit, but also has the other elements of policy that obviously this group is talking about, whether they be housing policies that are also associated. And I would posit that we have to have a unified policy that makes sense. Both can be done in BRT or light rail, but I do think that we have a stronger case for light rail, at least initially, especially with where the federal dynamic is. But of course, that depends on the policymakers. I think what we need to do is essentially we have a chance to ask to go for the brass ring, so to speak. We have a proven success in light rail in St. Louis, and I would simply make that.
Okay. I could, Could someone mute themselves? I hear a dog barking in the background, please.
Yeah.
Next question, are there any specific capital purchases that Bi-State has would consider a critical need?
Well, we do have so I have the statutory obligation to pass not only my annual operating budget, but then there is a 5-year capital budget behind that. And what we do is we use our regular allocation to then carve off some money, which creates the local match, mostly oriented towards our rolling stock. You saw the picture of the buses. So those, for instance, are a fully funded program. So we do a pretty good job of trying to look into the future as to servicing and having the capital needs of our existing infrastructure. So most of the infrastructure of the future are the expansion lines. Okay, so I'd say confidently that we don't have any critical right now needs as far as capital is concerned. We do need endorsement of our plans because I'm spending essentially the political capital of the city and county and St. Clair County every single day. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, if I understand correctly, when Metrolink was built, the local match largely took the form of the right-of-way itself. In any case, the question is, where does the local match come from if you can't use other Fed funds?
Well, so there are existing Prop M funds that both the city of St. Louis and county have right now for that local match. That is in hand. My point would be on that 80-20 split, if we were able to achieve that objective following the Justice 40 initiative by the Biden administration, we would be able to build more. That's absolutely accurate comment. The original light rail line in the mid-90s did contemplate a 20% local match that was based on some of the capitalized right-of-way, including the Eads Bridge, a very, very creative project. That is not as available as it was at that time. You know, we were one of the very first cities out of the box with light rail at the time, and mostly what the federal government, as we compete for these funds, and let's remember now, essentially we're competing for these funds against some of our partners, the Indianapolis, the Pittsburghs, the San Jose's. So it's very important that we distinguish ourselves with a strong strong local match, which is in place, and through a combination of the city and the county. And it's also that very compelling that we have a product that is compelling from the federal standpoint. I think that both the North Side line and South Side have very strong possibilities and will compete well, but especially if they're unified with other public policy, housing policy, development policy. Those essentially show the feds that they're getting more bang for their buck, that we are leveraging those assets to do more things.
Okay, I jumped over one, and we're going to have just a couple more, and then we're going to move on to the next presenter. So the one question is, you are pointing to ridership loss as a major loss in revenue. Can you clarify how much of operating costs is actually covered by rider fare?
Sure. So, so our normal revenue, let's see, based on FY 2018, which is really the best year to go to, was normal fare revenue was between $37 and $40 million. Okay. Roughly on the COVID affected year, it'll be closer to 20 to 18. Okay. So a roughly 50% effect on our end budget. Okay. But we do expect to move up towards that $30 million number. So it is a sizable contribution to our overall budget. Our overall annual budget, as far as operating is concerned, is in excess of $300 million. So it is a small portion, but albeit a very important one, mostly because those dollars are completely, as they say, unencumbered. so they can be matched more appropriately and is the most flexible dollars that we typically have.
Okay, so you were saying the fares total how much a year about, did you say?
So on the COVID affected years, it'll be around $18 million.
Okay. 18
on a normal year, it's closer to 40.
Okay, so it's excess of 10% of your overall budget.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, because one of
fare box recovery, as it is, would be the transit term. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get wonky with all of our terms, but it is in excess of 10%.
Because one of the other follow-up questions we had is a free fare such as one in Kansas City a possibility here in St. Louis?
So I don't think so, just simply because of the math. And remember, Kansas City system is roughly 1/3 of St. Louis's. It is largely bus oriented, and it is largely, so it is a much smaller system to a comprehensive system, and it does not involve light rail. Plus, fare media associated with our fundamental safety and security plan, that is one of the first points of contact that folks have on our system. And I think it is a valuable component of essentially a Midwestern city like ours, and our first point of safety and security. Additionally, I might add that it is a good fare generator. I mean, $40 million is quite a bit of money, and I'm talking to the city right now, but St. Louis County actually has a larger percentage of our system. St. Louis County is in excess of 50% of the system. And of course, so they have roughly a 50% share of the system. And of course, I would have to, free fare would have to pass there and in St. Clair County as well. And that'd be difficult to do.
Okay, last question that we're gonna have time for. Are there any specific capital purchase needs that Bi-State has delayed or deferred that can now be achieved with additional funding? So
one project that we are moving forward on that did experience some delay is some upgrades to our camera systems. Okay, and that's a normal upgrade that comes on our capital programs and has been associated with our safety and security. Roughly, that new camera system upgrade is around $13 million. It's a really critical element, and of course, some of the upgrades in those systems are great and move to the next generation, which are very positive. But the effect of the pandemic has been significant on certain technical issues. As a matter of fact, I actually do have some buses that I'm waiting on parts for, as the supply chain has been very difficult to deal with in this pandemic environment. So I would call it safe to say that there's been a slight delay on this. I'm sorry for hedging slightly, but I got a lot of projects moving forward, and I want to try to answer the question accurately. All
right. Well, thank you, Toby, for your presentation. Members of the committee, there are some additional questions. We'll make sure that we get some answers to those after the meeting. Probably tomorrow at some time we'll get those out, and I'll copy those to you or whomever can answer the best way to answer those. But thank you for your presentation and your time this evening. And we'll be talking, I'm sure, on some of the other projects, particularly the expansion of metro capabilities coming forward in the next few years.
Very good. I'd love to talk about it, and great questions, and I'm happy to answer questions at any time, and just invite me back. I'm happy to take the time.
Right. Thanks again. Okay, next on the agenda, we do have Neil Richardson. Neil, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming in loud and clear. Neil, Neil was just going to present some overview in terms of how they're presenting or how they're approaching economic development. So Neil, if you want to, I'll give the screen to you and the floor to you.
Great. Can everyone see my screen okay?
By the way, this will be posted on the website. I didn't get it until just shortly before the meeting. So, but we will make sure that this gets posted so you have access, so the members of the committee have access to this. Okay, go ahead.
And it does say SLDC Economic Justice at the top, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. I have a couple screens up with a lot of different windows, but I'll try to keep this as short and sweet as possible. Again, my name is Neil Richardson. I'm an executive director of St. Louis Development Corporation. For those who may not be familiar with SLDC, we have we're umbrella nonprofit organization that is the economic development arm for the city of St. Louis. You all may be familiar with some of our subsidiary agencies such as LRA, which manages our vacant, dilapidated housing as well as vacant lots. We have currently over 10,000 properties within our inventory, 2,000 of them are residential buildings, about 70 commercial buildings, and over 8,000 lots. Our Port Authority, which is responsible for everything that's on our port within the Mississippi. We have one of the most efficient ports and currently 100% leased on the Mississippi River. Then we also have LCRA, that is the Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority, that handles most of our major projects such as NGA and other development, land assembly, and financing efforts that are necessary. We also have our local development company that performs SBA lending to support small businesses as well as women and minority-owned business entities. So as we have developed and crafted our strategy for being the most impactful and effective around inclusive and equitable economic growth within the city of St. Louis, we have been focused on economic justice. And for us, that means providing equitable opportunity to thrive for all of our residents by addressing historical barriers, economic inequities, and closing the racial wealth gap. We are focused on closing the racial wealth gap because of the disparities that exist. We understand as a city, the majority of our population is African-American. And currently, we have a low amount of value and wealth, and there's a high disparate impact on those that are living in marginalized communities, particularly our Black residents, businesses, and neighborhoods. At this time, we have developed our equitable economic development framework. From that framework, there are three key areas that have popped out to us around Black households currently have 1/10 of the wealth that white households have within the city of St. Louis. Our Black employees make on average 48% of what a white employee makes. Homes in our predominantly Black zip codes are worth 1/4 of those in our white zip codes. And that leads to obvious disproportionate impacts as it relates to access to capital. So what we see is many of our women and minority-owned business entities have more likely to be denied business loans and applicants being denied mortgages. We currently have a $1 trillion opportunity by closing the racial wealth gap in the United States. And that is very prevalent and obvious for the city of St. Louis, again, because of the gap between Black and white households in our city. As you all may know, the impacts of COVID-19 has had a disproportionate effect of the most marginalized and vulnerable residents, businesses, neighborhoods, and also our communities at large. So as we are looking to address these challenges, it is very critical for the city of St. Louis, as 59.2% of our geography and 52.9% of our residents live in census tracts with incomes below 60% of the area median gross income, or have a poverty rate of 25% or more. These areas have been deemed by HUD as qualified census tract for ARPA funds because of the heightened exposure to adverse economic and health impacts due to COVID-19. These census tracts also qualify for new market tax credits and other significant federal funding due to the disproportionate impacts that we are currently faced with and the demographics within the city of St. Louis. So as you all know, we were awarded over $500 million in ARPA funds. And those ARPA funds are really designed to address the impacts in those who were most impacted by COVID-19 and this pandemic. And that's why we believe this time is now for SLDC in the city of St. Louis to prioritize economic justice. And we have 4 key areas in which we aim to do that. That's through workforce development, investing in the capacity building of our youth, underemployed, unemployed residents, and grow the workforce of the future, aligning them with quality jobs, along with our regional priorities. Many of you may be familiar with NGA, the National Geospatial Agency, GeoFutures, and creating a pipeline to strong workforce development. But also there are living wage jobs that can be created now while also revitalizing our community, such as through landscaping, through home repairs, and other investments into small businesses. And that leads me to my second pillar around business empowerment. We must build an ecosystem for women and minority-owned business entities to have equitable access to capital, technical assistance, mentorship, sponsorship, and networking opportunities to launch, grow, and sustain their businesses long-term. The pandemic has had, again, a disproportionate impact on these small businesses. And if we're aiming to build a resilient economy, we must build the capacity of these small businesses to withstand a pandemic, natural disasters, or any other economic disruption. We also must revitalize our neighborhoods by investing in the capacity and wealth building of these neighborhoods by creating opportunities in our qualified census tracts to access to economic opportunities through home ownership, anti-displacement, entrepreneurship, and as Toby spoke to around Bi-State, ensuring that we're creating career-oriented transit opportunities. So this is very important and critical as we think about having over 10,000 LRA properties. And of those 10,000 LRA properties, around 95 to 96% of them are located in these qualified census tracts. So again, we must invest intentionally in these areas that have been historically disinvested and underserved. And the final key component is creating an equitable and inclusive real estate development model. So as we're investing and leveraging our tools such as tax credit financing and investments of tax abatements and others through the city, we want to incentivize investing in many of our qualified census tracts that have not had investment previously. So that requires us to be, again, very strategic and very intentional about where we invest our dollars to create the greatest impact to build a resilient economy. On the next page, you'll see our focus and our budget to ultimately achieve these goals. Through the American Rescue Plan Act, we are aiming to leverage those dollars towards the neighborhood beautification and stabilization, infrastructure, and small business support, as well as creating home ownership opportunities. Through our Build Back Better grant, we're able to create investment in many of our commercial corridors, as well as build on our infrastructure for workforce of the future. Through our New Market Tax Credit Program, we're able to create opportunities by advancing investment and job creation in our underserved areas and our underserved communities, through the investment into large commercial buildings, as well as building out manufacturing and other commercial space. We're also working with our philanthropic and corporate community to raise funding and leverage that funding to address the challenges with patient capital for many of our women and minority-owned business entities, advance environmental justice, and ensure that we're embedding many of our anti-displacement measures, such as home repair, landscaping, and tax increment support to our residents who have dedicated their lives and generations to the city of St. Louis. And finally, we hope to leverage the infrastructure fund as well as the reconciliation fund to address many of the challenges that our communities face. One of the key components that we're driving through this effort of being more equitable and inclusive is the deployment of a neighborhood community group. So we have a new department within SLDC that's focused on strategic neighborhood growth and development. And within every neighborhood, all 79 of them, we are focused on bringing the full resources and support of SLDC by deploying neighborhood ambassadors to represent each of those areas. We also are planning and projecting to create economic empowerment centers that will provide workforce development, business empowerment, and micro developer programs in our communities that have been most impacted by COVID. Our goal through these efforts is to increase the number of quality jobs, increase wealth in households, build up opportunities for our businesses to have access to capital and support, increase the number of qualified employees. Within our neighborhoods, we want to increase property values, increase home ownership, and ultimately decrease vacancy. Across our region, this will lead to an increase in population, have a positive impact on our poverty rates, and lead to long-term tax revenue growth. We believe that St. Louis has an opportunity in this moment to be able to achieve its full potential by investing in the most marginalized residents, businesses, and communities. And the only way we achieve this is through economic justice. And economic justice, as Dr. Cornel West says, is what love looks like in public. So this is our opportunity in St. Louis in this moment to show love to our entire city. Thank you for your time today. Paul, I'll pass it back over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Actually, let's go directly to the questions. And this first question I noticed was one of the ones I'm thinking of regarding capital, because obviously this is a Citizen Advisory Committee for Capital, and I'm on the Capital Committee as well. And so when we think about in those terms, the question would be, how does SLDC believe the capital improvement plan can be aligned and leveraged to meet the discussed economic justice goals of SLDC?
Yes, so as you all see that this is just the dollars that you see here, the $200 million that you see on this page, just under 200 million, is focused on our most urgent and immediate needs. The work and the impact that we have to drive is much larger than this to achieve our economic justice goals. But in order to stop the bleeding, stop the gap, in order for us to achieve our goals, we have to start now. And that includes focus on neighborhood beautification and stabilization, investing in our LRA properties. So right now in this moment, LRA has about $9 million that they can spend on maintenance of those properties, but we ultimately need closer to $15 million to be able to maintain our LRA vacant lots, our buildings, our commercial space, in order to reduce the crime in those areas, as well as to spark other investment. So there's an opportunity to leverage those funds around beautification and stabilization, but also investing into revitalization of these commercial corridors. So as you may see that the infrastructure within these neighborhoods need to be rebuilt as well. That includes sidewalks, lighting, and facade repairs to be able to attract other investment into these neighborhoods. What we're aiming to achieve is catalytic investment and not just a one-time shot in the arm. We are hoping to create generational and sustainable wealth in these neighborhoods, but in order to achieve that, we must be very strategic in how we invest in the infrastructure and so creating that ecosystem that will support these small businesses and the workforce to be created for the future. And that's why these line items that you see here are very critical to our most urgent and immediate needs.
Okay, let me follow up with that. So do you believe that, because we're going to be going through this over the next year or so, allocating funds for capital. So do you envision there's going to be some specific projects that could be bolstered or supplemented with city capital funds to enhance what you guys are doing on the development side?
Most definitely. So as we are looking at the Build Back Better grant, for example, and we're creating the workforce of the future through the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Center, as well as creating potentially an innovation center on MLK. So those are a couple of things that we're looking at, specific projects, right, that create catalytic investment. If we're able to invest into those corridors and create home ownership opportunities on the periphery of those corridors, now we're rebuilding those neighborhoods. But in order for us to be able to make that first investment, we also must have infrastructure. We must have roads, because if you build a restaurant or a retail space and the roads and the sidewalks are poor, then that really can attract the type of retail customers that will attract the investment that's needed in the area to spark the economy in those various neighborhoods.
Okay, here's another question. Can vacant St. Louis public schools be purchased for redevelopment with BBB funds or partially as economic empowerment centers?
Yes, that's exactly what the plan is. So I've been working very closely with Dr. Adams and the St. Louis Public Schools to identify vacant property that we could purchase. And that's why I mentioned earlier through our LCRA that does land assembly and infrastructure. We can use these funds to be able to purchase these schools, put them in the hands of SLDC for economic development purposes, turning these schools into economic empowerment hubs and centers that they can create workforce development programs, provide business empowerment for our small women and minority-owned business entities, as well as create an ecosystem for small contractors and developers to grow. So that's part of the plan, is to work with the St. Louis Public School District on identifying locations in which we can revitalize these once thriving schools, providing support for their whole community to once again bring prominence and hope back.
Okay, on that slide you've got up right now, you list all the sources of funds there. Of those sources of funds, which are essentially in hand and which are still in a request stage?
So the Build Back Better grant is currently going through the application process. Right now, we have a first round of applications due in October, with the second round due in March of 2022. So we'll know more in March. The new market tax credits, the $40 million, has been allocated to SLDC, so that's currently in hand. We're currently raising philanthropic and corporate grant dollars to support SLDC in our economic justice efforts. We currently just kicked off that campaign, or just going to kick off that campaign later this year, rolling it to Q1 of 2022. The Infrastructure Fund and Reconciliation Fund is still being determined on a federal level. And then through the ARPA, the first round of the ARPA funds, about $29 million was allocated to SLDC. So the quest here is $50 million overall through ARPA to be able to move this forward. So the new market tax credit program and portion of the ARPA has been allocated to SLDC and currently.
How does one go about getting the LRA funds for redevelopment of the empty buildings?
You get them? No, Reggie. I see.
So the way that we would manage the redevelopment for the LRA properties is we would really first work to stabilize the ones that are falling, either through demolition or through board up. Our plan is to keep the properties up and restore the historical nature of those buildings. So we would put out RFPs for LRA properties to be maintained outside of just our maintenance team and staff. We currently are working to fully staff up our maintenance team to focus on these efforts, but also we will be putting out RFPs for our LRA properties as it relates to maintenance and support. And as we think about revitalizing these areas and these home repair programs and home ownership programs, that's where our additional capital is needed to provide the rehabilitation and home ownership opportunities to really bring these properties, not just stabilize them, but revitalize them and bring them on the market. So that's the current process right now, is RFPing for the stabilization portion. But as we develop a new program around the home ownership, those funds will be made available through a different process, which is currently in development right now.
The other question, are SLDC requests included in the Excel spreadsheet of inventory? We do not have a specific request regarding SLDC projects at this point, but I am assuming, Neil, that you are working on those.
That's correct. Yes, I will have that over to you all.
Are there any tools or programs in place to ensure transparency and accountability with these funding programs? If not, could a platform be purchased to increase transparency?
Yes, I think we definitely want to create transparency. So one of the first, I don't know if you all seen it on one of the previous slides that I have here, but transparency is paramount for us as we move forward. It's one of our key principles. I'm just now 90 days into the job, but we're developing an economic justice action plan that's really about transparency and ensuring that as we are leveraging these dollars and utilizing these funds, we will have clear transparency and engagement with the community and actually working with these community-based organizations on allocating and deploying these funds and making sure that everyone is fully aware of how these funds are being deployed.
Okay, we can do one more here and then we're going to move on to the next presenter. Currently, the budget requests coming to the CAP committee do not seem to be targeted in relation to SLDC's goals. How will SLDC communicate to city departments its long-term plan so budget requests can be targeted toward economic equity building? So in other words, how are you beginning to work with the departments and making sure that those priorities are set?
Yeah, so we're working very strategically. So I would say it's a top-down approach in this manner. The mayor and I are very aligned on our goals around economic justice and investing in the historically marginalized and underserved communities. And that has been communicated to our community development administration with SLATE, with our planning division, as well as our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as we work together to address these challenges and these barriers. We're working strategically together. So some of the funds that have been released through ARPA actually will flow through Community Development Administration, and then they will go to SLDC in order for it to have full deployment. One of our goals and objectives is to continue to work directly with the mayor's office, the director of policy and development, Noel Pfeffer, on these efforts as we continue to create a vision for how all of these city agencies work together to achieve economic justice.
Okay, thank you, Neil, very much for the presentation. For those questions that we haven't gotten to, there are several of those. We'll make sure that we got some sort of response to them sometime tomorrow, and we'll get those out. But thank you for your time.
So much. I really appreciate it, everyone. Good luck with the process.
Okay, thanks. Next on tap, we have presenters from Great Rivers Greenway. Great Rivers Greenway as a separate funding source, but a lot of what they do impacts a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of streets and public access. And we do have Susan. Are you
I'm
with
here.
us still? Okay.
I'm here.
Susan Drotman, I will give the floor to you, and you can.
Thank you. Thank you.
present.
All right. Well, thank you all for allowing us to be here tonight. I've got the team with me. I'm going to tag team with Mark Vogel, but Shaughnessy Daniels, Emma Clues, and Todd Antoine are here to answer questions, so they're going to be monitoring the chat. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and hopefully you can see it okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about two projects tonight, the Brickline Greenway and the Hodemont, and I'm going to go really fast. What you see here is the outcome of an international design competition for what used to be called Shoto Greenway. And so today, it is this vast connection of the four great parks, Fairground to Tower Grove, the Arch to Forest Park, as well as really thinking about knitting the neighborhoods together. And we started this process in 2017 with many stakeholders, residents. We wanted to make sure that equity was a pillar of the project and that we had residents at the same table with our institutional, civic, and philanthropic leaders. And we heard a lot from the residents about the importance of equity and economic development when it comes to building a greenway. So over the course of the last few years, we've held over 400 meetings. We've had 13 working groups, an Artist of Color Council, focus groups, just a wide variety of opportunities for the community to be involved, and they continue to be involved. So I'm going to focus real quickly on two things, the economic piece and the equity piece, as well as what the Greenway might look and feel like around St. Louis. We've studied these projects around the nation. We know that through research, they attract and retain talent. We also know that they encourage real estate development. Millions of dollars of investment can turn into hundreds of millions in real estate value. There also have been unintended consequences of those projects that have caused displacement and gentrification. So we really started with that understanding when we began developing the framework plan, and Emma can paste the link to that in the chat. But economic impact in a greenway is most likely to occur between 500 feet and a quarter mile. What is different about the Brickline than any other project we've ever tackled is that we are really focused on working adjacent to the Greenway to ensure that we retain existing residents and businesses, and that we attract new businesses and residents that help build out strong, vibrant neighborhoods. So to help us with that, we had an equity economic development working group who set out 4 recommendations. I can't, for the sake of the time, won't read all of these to you. There's a lot more involved in the implementation of this. But what we are planning to do next is to hire someone specifically to help coordinate with the city, Sldc, and with the other regional economic partners on development related to the Brickline, adjacent to it, ensuring that we think about not only economic and equitable development, but the policies that are needed to retain the businesses and the residents that live there. So real quickly, this is what we call the arterial map. This is where we are starting today. So the items in the red dots are the corridors in the red dots I'm going to share with you. Those in the yellow dots are already funded through partner opportunities, the build grant to the 20th Street connection here up to the NGA, and the Tower Grove to Cortex connector is funded through the city, and we are partnering to help project manage that. So I'm just going to share with you real quickly a couple of these corridors. There's 3 in particular that we're focused on. First is Fairground or North Grand Avenue and Spring Avenue. So we have been working with the Fairground Area Working Group. They asked for more resident involvement, so we have started a citizen advisory committee this summer, and they are now engaged in discussing what and how the Greenway should be, what it should look like, and what amenities they want. We did apply for a raise grant from Fairground to the Foundry because we wanted to see this project lift off as soon as possible. It also has a strong connection over St. Louis Avenue to the Griot, to St. Louis Avenue Park and the NGA. And this is just an image we shared with the citizens along Spring so that we could get some feedback. In the Mill Creek or the Central Corridor from Compton Avenue to 20th Street, we worked, well, there was an Artist of Color Council in the framework plan, but specifically, they came up with 6 aspirations around art. A key component of that was unearthing the history of the city of St. Louis and telling the stories and making sure that we really provoke a conversation about urban planning, displacement, and other issues that have happened and how we think about that going forward. So I'm going to share a very short video. This is artist Damon Davis, who is part of the winning competition. He's a local artist.
I was invited by the Brickline Greenway to help design a monument to commemorate a neighborhood, a historically black neighborhood in St. Louis called Mill Creek Valley. Mill Creek Valley was a thriving black community. There was a thriving business community, nightlife, arts community, and so Mill Creek Valley was removed, I guess, paved over because they were trying to build a highway in the 50s. But again, it was a thriving community in its heyday. It was a beautiful place to be. We're thinking of these things as pedestals and portals. We'll be making, I guess, 15 to 20 foot pylons, so tall obelisks, sort of monolith statue sort of things. 2 slabs of stone sandwich a glass chamber, and at the top of the glass chamber, actual earth from the ground, from Mill Creek, is hoisted up. So what I wanted to do was create something that reminds us of an hourglass and that idea of time, but taking the soil and encapsulating it and freezing it at the top. So actually freezing time, and hopefully it can be, I guess, a beautiful place and something that could start a conversation about who these people were, so that we can, you know, remember them and take pride in what happened there and who they were and what they did.
So this is an image of the 1940s original Sanborn map for which Damon got his vision. And so you can see the plats and the homes here. This is Compton Avenue, where Harris Stowe is, all the way to 20th Street, the western end of the Gateway Mall, and the new MLS Stadium. This is what it looks like today. We have been just thrilled working with BPS and the street department, allowing us to use some of the public right-of-way to help build these corridors. And you can see what a strong anchor this makes from Harris Stowe all the way to the new stadium. Really changes the look and the feel, and it creates a great deal of access for folks. In the Metrolink corridor, Toby mentioned the number 71 bus along Grand. So we work very closely with Bi-State to integrate the trail system and the greenways with transit. They're fantastic partners. And that's part of the reason that the RAISE grant was so important to us, is that north-south transit corridor. In addition, we are working in the abandoned third rail of the Metrolink corridor, working to connect the Cortex transit station into the Grand transit station. This is Bi-State property that you see here, and they've just been terrific about, like the city, sharing their right-of-way. I realize you can't see this map close up, but just suffice to say, this is a $245 million project. It's divided into segments. Paul mentioned that we do have an existing stream. It's about $22 million a year. So when you're looking at the scale of the Brickline, we're going to need a large private raise, but we are also going to need about $75 million in federal funding to help leverage those private dollars and the funding that Great Rivers Greenway has. So I just added this slide today, so we'll send it back out to you. But this is sort of the three projects I just shared with you. The most expensive, of course, is Fairground to the Foundry. It's a $41 million project. We did apply for a $24.7 million RAISE grant. That's the construction there is $35 million. We'll have to raise $10.5 million, and we'll need an additional $6 for design and construction inspection. The Cortex to Grand Metro Station is $23 million. We do have a $4 million CMAQ grant that we hope to be awarded in October from East West Gateway, but we've got quite a bit of raise to do there as well. And then the Mill Creek section is $19 million. We do have some private funding pledged to that, so we're going to need to raise about $13 million for that project. So I am going to stop share here, and then I'm going to let Mark talk about Hodemont, and we'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay, if you can let me know if you can see that. Yes? Okay,
Yes.
great. Mark Vogel, project manager for planning here at Great Rivers Greenway. I want to talk a little bit about the Hodemont tracks, or what we call the Greenway on the Hodemont tracks. This is actually a 3.5-mile corridor that used to be a streetcar line that connects 7 different neighborhoods in the city of St. Louis, basically from Grand Center to the city limits line at Gwen Giles Park. It also intersects several of our other greenways, the existing St. Vincent Greenway, and eventually Brickline, what Susan was just talking about. It's property that is largely owned by Bi-State and the city of St. Louis. It functions as an alley right now. But we're interested in turning this into a greenway. But long before we ever did any design work, we started engaging with the community, just listening to what their concerns were, what their visions were, what they'd like to see running through this corridor. And then we did a lot of advanced preliminary studies. And we've come to this point now where engagement and design have come together to launch this concept plan and hopefully move forward in the coming years. In 2018, when we started talking with the community, the first question is, do you want a greenway? And overwhelmingly, we heard yes. And people told us what they would like to see, some of the different amenities, concerns they have about safety, security, access to privacy. And then when we launched the plan last year, it was right as COVID hit. And our consultant teams did a fantastic job of pivoting and coming up with some very creative ways to engage with the community with online surveys, a citizen advisory committee that we did entirely virtually, youth engagement. We attended many different events, and we came up with hundreds of ideas of what was important to the community and what they would like to see there. And those ideas formed these 5 goals for the Hodemont: celebrating community and culture, supporting socioeconomic growth, promoting safety, security, and access, advocating wellness and health, and enhancing the environment. And we use these goals as benchmarks to help us formulate the design. The corridor design itself consists of these 3 things. It's the corridor, intersections at street crossings, and then we looked at model sites for how we might treat adjacent vacant property. And some of the design work that they came up with were really being very sensitive to adjacent property owners. These little symbols here relate back to the goal. So every single element that you see in these designs relates back to what we heard the community, what was important, including things like public art, enhancing safety. We even took a look at lighting to ensure that this is a safe environment for people to transit as they're using the Greenway to get to schools and jobs and to other destinations. We looked at this very unique part of the corridor where it is the bi-state facility in the middle and then city alleyways on either side. So we need to make sure that we're still allowing for circulation, people to access their garages and services and trash pickup and other utilities in addition to the Greenway itself. A lot of different ideas about some that are landscape heavy and some that might be more pavement oriented or hardscape. But looking at different ways that the Greenway design can reinforce both the Great Rivers Greenway brand and have this level of consistency, but also allow for unique characteristics that reflect the communities and neighborhoods that it flows through. We've got a small section near the Pomoja Academy where we'll probably be on street to connect to the Brickline. And so we looked at how this corridor might look near Grand Center, as well as looking at intersection crossings to make these narrower for pedestrians to cross, make them safer, and hopefully also work with bi-state and make these areas where the Greenway can intersect these really important transit services so that the Greenway can function both for transportation as well as recreation. Also, other measures to slow traffic down by using speed tables, using signage, landscaping to make this not just a beautiful place, but also a safe place. And another example of one of these conditions where the Greenway exists in between the alley crossing. So there's a lot of different design components to this. An example of way we might treat an adjacent property that might be publicly owned, and the community weighed in on how this design might work. But we want to make sure that these designs reinforce the Greenway and provide some of those activation areas that we just don't have the room to do on the Greenway itself. We're looking at phasing. We believe that it would be very difficult to develop all 3.5 miles all at once. So we're trying to divide the Greenway into logical, developable segments. And as we move forward, we want to continue to engage with the community on other aspects of identity, culture, safety, and stewardship. Again, the major street crossings for safety. Looking at what happens with neighbors and how they may access and what's the interface between people's backyards and the Greenway itself. We're still very, very conceptual at this point. We believe that this is probably going to be about a $21 million project when it's all said and done. But our next steps are to refine the design, refine the cost estimate, but also to continue engaging with the community and ensure that this is something that is going to be bringing value to these neighborhoods. And finally, I just wanted to end with this. We feel very strongly that this is a project that is going to unite the community and unite these 7 neighborhoods. And we're already seeing that in their expression of gratitude about how we've taken this process and bringing people closer together even before construction has even started. Thanks.
Okay. Do you want to stop?
Yeah, is that conclusion of your presentation?
Yes, it is.
And,
Great.
and just to confirm that the Hodemont ties into the Brickline along Vandeventer at Enright.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Mark. We go quickly to the question, and by the way, thank you, Emma. I can see you're already responding on some of those. I'll just go through some of these pretty quickly here. One of the questions was, can Greenway and the bus rapid transit coexist on Grand and North City? And that was, the answer was absolutely. Coordinate that and to our knowledge, Greenway does not block any possibility of BRT. A subsequent question was, recently Wells Fargo repaved a surface parking lot at Jefferson and Market. It seems like an important parcel for redevelopment, highly visible along the new Greenway. Do existing businesses and property owners see the potential and are engaged with the planning? And so the answer would be yes, they are engaged all along during the planning, are supportive of the project. One of the reasons we want the person on board to focus on economic development equity is to be able to take on those kinds of conversations and coordinate specifically. Lots of opportunities there beyond the overall engagement we've done to date. And then another compliment on your presentation and a general question: what would you want the members of the CAC, that's the Citizens Advisory Committee, to know about capital investments in the city can help make this a reality? So
I'll answer that. And there's a couple of important things. You know, one is that the partnership with the city and investment from the city with GRG and the private dollars really helps all ships rise together. Like leveraging it all together really puts us in a great position to attract more private dollars, to attract more federal funding. So it's really important from that perspective. But equally important, we want to see this project happen, particularly in North St. Louis, and we're going to need help. It's bigger than we are. It's certainly something that we believe can make a huge difference in the growth in population and businesses in St. Louis. We know that there are issues related to that. We're prepared to address those before it happens. But I think we all want to see a very strong, competitive city of St. Louis. It affects the entire region. And so it's going to take all of us working together, and it's going to take a lot of funding sources to make this happen.
okay, thank you again, Susan. Yeah, and in looking at the presentation, it's an impressive presentation. And with my budget director hat on, I think this is considered the eye candy of capital projects, because you look at it and you see what it is. And meanwhile, we're stuck with the broken sewer pipes and whatever we have to deal with over here on the capital committee most of the time. But no,
Well, the good news about this kind of eye candy is it brings everybody up, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not just about recreation, it's really about economic opportunity for all. So we're really grateful. There's one more question that I didn't answer that popped up to me, and that was if it was higher density mixed use development as the preferred redevelopment of that site along, I think you mean Jefferson. And so I believe there is a Kimpton Hotel, a training center on one side, and residential maybe proposed on the other corner. So happy to, anybody can shoot me a note, email. We'll be happy to answer any other questions.
All right, thanks again. Now going back, as I said, more to the more mundane of our capital improvements, we've got the water division. We've got our normal enterprise. It's an enterprise fund. It operates on its revenues and rates that it charges its customers, including the residents within the city of St. Louis. And we do have our Kurt Scobie, who is the water commissioner. And are you with us, Kurt?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming in loud and clear. All right, so I'll give the floor to you.
I'm hurt that you don't consider a water main a beautiful thing. So let me see if I can share my presentation with you. All right. Can you see it?
Yes, you're up.
All right, great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you tonight for some needs in the City of St. Louis Water Division. I want to talk a little bit about what the Water Division is and in addition to our needs. We're an enterprise account. We are funded by the sale of water and services that we provide our citizens and customers. We do not receive any tax money from the city. Our accounts are actually kept separate from the general revenue because we're set up to operate on a self-funding basis. We have been part of the city. We're a city department, and that started in 1835. Our system is primarily the City of St. Louis is our service area. We have 2 large water treatment plants. One is on the Mississippi River, the Chain of Rocks in North St. Louis. The second plant is out in Chesterfield on the Missouri River, the Howard Bend plant. We have 3 large storage tanks or reservoirs. We have over 1,200 miles of water mains ranging from small 4-inch to 84 inches in diameter. Many fire hydrants, many valves in our system. We touch upon the lives of every citizen and business every day in the services that we provide. One of our challenges is aging infrastructure. Water main breaks are a thing that happens. They occur more frequently as the system age. We do have an older system like many of the established cities in the country. So we see over time increasing number of water main breaks. Excuse me. It's a real challenge. They have consequences there. This is a 36-inch diameter water main break that was impacting one of our businesses. It's when you do have a main break, you do disrupt businesses, you do disrupt schools, daycares, and the lives of our average citizen. This is a 36-inch valve that we replaced a few years ago. We did this with our own crew. This is on an intersection of 2 transmission mains out in the system. This can be a real challenge to do some of these capital improvements because we have to, it's a lot of heavy work. We have to isolate the place that we're going to work so that the water doesn't flow out of the pipe when we cut it. So we are shutting valves upstream. That disrupts the normal flow of the water through the system. So we end up having to, for lack of a better term, babysit the pressures and flows of the water in the system to make sure everybody is continues to receive the water that they expect and need. The Howard Bend plant, this is the one on the Missouri River, was built and went into service in 1929. You can see the settling basins here in the foreground. It is similar in construction and process to our Chain of Rocks plant. In addition to the settling basins that we have pumps that move water from the river into the treatment process, and then another set of pumps that move water from the plant to move the finished water out in our system. We have filtration buildings. We have a chemical feed storage and feeding facilities here. We also maintain a lab at each of the plants to oversee and maintain the water quality throughout the process, and then also out in the distribution system. This image is of the Chain of Rocks distribution pumps. They pump the finished water out to the system. The pump on the right is actually, you see motor that powers the pump, the electrical motor, and the pump is behind it to the left. The motor has been removed from that pump. And these are something that are giving us trouble. In the 60s, 1960s and 1970s, the plants were electrified. Up until that point, steam was used to operate the pumps. And at that time, we were switched over to electric power to perform the pumping. The pumps and motors that you see here and at both plants, both on the raw water and on the finished water, are pumps that were installed at that time. So they are at their useful life end, and one of the things that we're doing and want to continue to do is refurbish and rebuild these pumps so that they maintain the reliability. Part of what we're seeing some issues with is the electrical substations. We have one at each of our plants. We own them. They take the high voltage that comes in from Ameren UE. They convert it to lower voltages that we can use in our plants. We need to replace switches and circuit breakers and refurbish some transformers is some of the critical needs that we're hoping to get funded here. This is an overview of the projects that we like to do if we get funding at the treatment plants at the Chain of Rocks. We would like to redo motors and pump replacement. We also would like to redo the electrical substation. The Howard Bend treatment plant, we have the same items put on there, the pumps, motors, and substation. And we also have the high voltage 4160 volt power feeds that we need to replace and reroute at the plant. And all these are not cheap to do. Our distribution system, we have 3 large diameter transmission mains coming from our Howard Bend plant in Chesterfield to the city limits of St. Louis. They are approximately 6 feet in diameter. They range in age from 90 years old down to 50 years old. We would like to inspect them and have a condition assessment done on them so that we know what we need to do to make sure we get another 40, 50 years of service out of them. We have one of our projects is a Hampton Avenue water main rehabilitation. We would like to put a liner in this pipe. It currently is out of service. We've had too many leaks and problems with it. It's on a good day, we don't need it, but there are times that it'd be nice to have the pipe available to help us out, particularly when we have to take one of our other transmission mains out of service and continue to provide water. Vacated Lawton Place in Teachers Drive. This is up by Harris Stowe College. We have a 20-inch water main that has broken and has impacted the college and some of our customers in the area. We would like to line this. And this is, when I say liner, we take a plastic liner, or a contractor will do that to insert it inside of the pipe. It's like a pipe within a pipe, and it provides a very substantial and solid, it regenerates the pipe so we can get many decades of use out of it. The last project I have is actually a host of projects. The small diameter water mains, the 6 and 8 inch water mains, these are the water mains that are in the residential streets that people's homes are actually connected to get their supply of water. I have $9 million in our request, and we have a number of neighborhoods and locations where we will go out and have main breaks 1 or 2 times a year. It's time to replace these mains, and it's And what we would do is take the water mains that have proven most unreliable and replace them with new pipe, and we shouldn't be back for decades for any issues. I know I'm talking fast, but I apologize for that. This image here is the Harbin plant in the 1993 flood. The reason I include this because I think it's probably the clearest example of the importance of doing timely capital improvements. A few years before this flood, there was another flood that almost topped our levee. So one of our priority improvements was to raise our levee 5 feet. We did that and completed that project just a few months before the 93 flood. Had we not done this project, we would have lost this plant. It would have been flooded out. We would not have been able to supply the whole city of St. Louis with water. We could supply probably part of the city, some of the water that they need through our other plants, but our system is set up to, it needs 2 plants to fulfill its mission. If you look above it, in the background, you'll see some more basins that are barely out of the water. And there's some others that you can't see because they're flooded. At the time, this was the central plant of St. Louis County Water, which is now Missouri American. They had to do the capital improvement to raise their levees and provide protection against a flood. But they deferred that longer than we did, and it caught up with them. A good part, half at least, of their plant was taken out of service. They could not meet the water demand of their customers. So they ended up buying a great deal of water, the water they needed to add to the water that they could produce to meet the needs. By us doing our timely improvement of the levee, the water crisis in the St. Louis area was averted during this flood. It's if our plant had gotten flooded, it would have taken months to bring it back completely back online because the pumps would have been flooded and the flood waters just don't go down that quickly. So with that, I'm concluding my my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Let's go to questions. And while your questions is what was going through my head as Kurt presented some of those numbers as well. Since you are an enterprise fund, public utility with regulated captive customers, how do you usually raise large amounts of capital funds aside from customer dollars?
It's all through water rates. And what we'll do is save money, basically accumulate money that we're not spending on the operations until we have the large enough amount of money to do a capital project.
Okay, does the city issue bonds as well? I mean, the water division issues bonds occasionally, does it not?
Yes, it does. It makes the money go a lot further. We will issue bonds, and the bonds are paid through the water rates. It's the state has a loan program, the state revolving loan. It's a subsidized interest rate. It's very good. We've taken advantage of that, and we would anticipate that we would continue to do that in the future.
Any plans for a new plant, or do you see the need for replacing any of your plants, either of your plants?
Not replacing the plants. We have a lot of capital or refurbishing and renewal that we need to do on our existing plants.
Okay. One thing I did want to point out with regard to the water division, and remember when we talked about sources, the ARPA sources and the buckets, and most of our capital source right now is from the revenue loss category. There was a provision in the ARPA funds, specifically a bucket for infrastructure related to water, sewer, and I think it was broadband. So there is a category there. So when we're considering the allocation of resources, one of the considerations we don't have to worry about is whether or not it comes out of the revenue replacement bucket, because that would not be, I mean, theoretically, it could also be charged to any that bucket particularly pertaining to water infrastructure. Okay, here's another question. Are there any concerns about lead pipes in St. Louis?
Yes, they are a concern. They're at the end of last year, a new lead and copper rule was published. It's on kind of on hold while the Biden administration reviews it. And I expect here sometime before the end of the year that they will come out with any revisions they may have. The city of St. Louis, there are quite a few lead service lines in the city. They're owned entirely by the customers. There's not a portion of it, like in some cities in the public right of way, that's owned by the utility. We are blessed with water quality, and we treat the water so that it is not corrosive. And we monitor it to make sure that the lead is not being leached. But in the end, they are a concern, and I can see a push coming to get them removed. Oh, and the other thing I'll add, if somebody wants their water tested to see if they have exposure to lead, they can contact us, and we will arrange for the water to be tested.
Okay, very good, Kurt. Thank you very much. So that's the conclusion of our presentations this evening. I do have a second on the agenda for this evening's meeting, just to give you an update on where we are with the method for soliciting input from the committee. We are in the process of developing a survey and sort of responding to some of your input from last week. What we're planning on is doing a sort of a dual process where we issue a survey to get general consensus of the group in terms of the projects themselves, and then following that up with a secondary survey. So what we'd like to be able to do is by tomorrow, we should have a survey that gives you the ability to respond to the various projects that have been presented. Then we would take that and hopefully you can get that done through the weekend, and then get that information compiled so that we would be ready to present the results of that first go round at our meeting next week. And then you can discuss that and we can discuss that, how that went and where the results of that survey went. And then we would follow that up with the secondary survey so that you can have a second shot at actually submitting a little bit more specifically what your feelings are towards the various projects. And so that's where we're at. So I would stay tuned. I think we will be sending out something to you, hopefully by the end of business tomorrow, regarding the survey. And then if you could all take your time and get it, review that and respond back to us so that we can get that compiling that on Monday and get back to you for Thursday's meeting. So and so the question is, how many meetings will be taking place? I'm hoping that we can get with next week's meeting that we can discuss the results of the preliminary survey and then say, okay, here's our secondary survey that we can issue out to you, and then you get back to us, and that would be the conclusion of our meetings. We'll have to see how that goes on Thursday, and that because we need to get back to the city's capital committee, which was we're holding off at the capital meeting now, just waiting for recommendations and your thoughts about projects. So, and that's and if there's nothing else, that's all we had for this evening. But again, just keep your eye out. You should be getting notice from us on that initial survey. All right. Again, I just, one other thing, I saw this final question. Once we're through this round of meetings, committee disbanded. What I do anticipate us having a number of rounds over the next year or so regarding as more funds become available. You have again, federal infrastructure funds, you got the second round of ARPA. And what I would envision, again, this would just my thinking would that be you'd pause your meetings and then reactivate. And then obviously we have to reach out to elected officials about how they would want to proceed and in terms of reactivating, in terms of going out and contacting you, whether you're available, that type of thing. But that's sort of what I was thinking, because I believe there's going to be a number, as I've stated several times, there's going to be a number of shots at this in terms of appropriations for capital improvements. And then some of them still need to be, seem to be developed a little bit further, particularly on the development side, where we can see, hey, where's the biggest bang for the buck in terms of developing certain areas of the city. And then as that comes to fruition, where we can get have our biggest impact. All right, well, thank you all very much. And again, you'll be hearing from us soon with an email survey, and otherwise we will see you next week. Good night, everyone.